Organization on this forum or on this platform today has somehow had to change their way of work with students. And that is the purpose of these webinars. It's basically for us to share best practices and learn from one another. In previous sessions, we focused on academic success online and how to support students virtually. Today, we will go through the student wellness session. We have 3 organizations that's going to present and share best practices and also their new ways of working. And we will just treat the small group discussions as conversations because we'll basically be learning from one another. We have the Old Mutual Education Trust that will present first with Nosipho and Nkabela. Then we will have Rita from Students for a Better Future, and Rita will then hand over to Stacy from Tomorrow Trust. Just a list of the organizations that's with us today. Thank you again, everybody, for joining. And then just some housekeeping before we do start. The mute button, please keep yourself on mute so there's no background noise. Also, the chat function, we encourage everybody to make use of the chat function. Pose any questions in the chat function and it will be seen to. If you do have questions of clarification during the presentations and it was not answered, you can then request a list of the participants will be sent via email. You can then answer your question directly to the presenter. Also, a survey will be sent after today's session, and we encourage everybody to just fill it out and participate. Some Zoom instructions for everybody. For those who are not comfortable with Zoom yet, everybody's encouraged to make use of the chat function, and again, just remain on mute when the presenters are up. When we move to the breakaway sessions, when we move to the breakaway sessions and you find yourself within a group with most of your colleagues, you can use the Ask for Help button. Julia will then assist and move you to a different breakaway room. Also, the share screen is, note that it is for presenters only. I will now hand over to the Old Mutual Education Trust to do the presentation. That will be followed by Students for a Better Future and Tomorrow Trust.
Okay. Oh, atendele namhlanje.
Morning. It's just taking longer from my side to show. Good morning, everyone. Can you see, is there something penny on the screen?
Yes, and Nkabela, you can move it to presenter's view. I do see the print, there we go.
Okay.
It's just taking a bit of time to...
Is it reflecting now?
Yes, it is.
All right, thanks for the introductions. All protocols observed. Good morning to everyone. Thanks for the opportunity for us to come together to share our own best practices as different organizations, which we are constantly learning from each other. From my side, I will open for OMET. I am Gubela Ntrogo from the All Mutual Education Trust. So our task is to present on student well-being, and we have engaged in a lot of work in trying to intervene to student wellness and well-being during this lockdown. But my presentation, I will start with the general impact of COVID-19 to the whole society, just to paint a picture of how people have been impacted or affected by COVID-19. So the general well-being of our citizens of the society has been negatively affected by COVID-19. It has created an emotional sense of anxiety, paranoia, and panic. The anxiety comes because no one knows when they will get it, especially now that the virus is airborne. And the COVID-19 has created some financial stress because there's been significant retrenchment, unemployment, and salary cuts across the industries in South Africa. And there's been food insecurity as a result of such financial loss and salary cuts. So all these have been impacting negatively our society. Of course, we can't deny there's a lot of gender-based violence cases. I call it a hidden epidemic, even though it's visible in our societies, and it has been declared as a pandemic by the president. Of course, there's been as well positive impacts of COVID-19, which is quality time with the family and opportunity to innovate, to think differently in order to make a difference. We've seen a lot of young people engaging in most innovative entrepreneurship ideas during this COVID-19. They have started their own businesses, and some have a lot of new YouTube channels which they use to keep engaged with their own peers. And they are communicating positive messages through these platforms. So as OMET, we had to respond to the immediate needs of our students, especially when the lockdown was first pronounced by the president. So we conducted a survey to assess our scholarship holders' current, what are they currently experiencing and the struggles that they encounter. So based on the survey, students highlighted the needs of access to laptops, data, and meal allowances. And then our board of trustees at OMET provided us with an emergency fund of COVID-19 to support our students. We're then able to address the following needs of laptops, food allowance, and data. As OMET, we believe that there's a strong causal relationship between mental wellness and academic performance. And hence our own intervention was informed by this. Because not having laptop or food allowance and even data has impacted students negatively, because there's this relationship that we need to acknowledge and also ensure that we intervene in our students' well-being. Being a scholarship holder as OMET, we had to adjust our model of support to mitigate the disruption of student psychosocial and academic life. Because at OMET, we understand that access to university doesn't guarantee success in any way. Hence, it was crucial for us to construct a student-centric intervention to mitigate these presenting circumstances brought about by lockdown, to ensure that there's overall student well-being and that it is balanced. And on the next slide, you will see that there's some responses from our students highlighting how the COVID-19 has affected them and their families. From the first excerpt, you can read, "My dad couldn't work at all because they do events such as parties. So financially and emotionally, as a family, we're not okay, but we are doing better." Secondly, at the bottom, family members stopped getting an income, situation a bit tense at home. Me not being able to go to campus, the pressure of online learning has increased drastically. And at the point where the student felt like giving up. It made me realize you often take little things for granted. Things like being face-to-face in class with the lecturer, talking to a friend, or even just going to the store to buy bread and milk. So it can be deduced from these accepts here that COVID-19 has really affected our students negatively. Hence, it was important for us as OMET to ensure that their well-being is a priority and everything we do, it's in their best interest.
Nkabela, hi, sorry, Bernardina. Can you please change the presentation to full presentation view? Because we are seeing the notes on the side.
Is it?
Yeah. Just.
If you go to display settings at the top, then you'll be able to swap presenter view.
Okay, let's load this. And then how do you swap? No, man, not this one. Display settings.
Yes, that one.
Let me just try to end the slideshow because it's not responding.
Yeah, perhaps stop sharing and start sharing again.
Okay.
Are you winning, Nkabela? Would you rather me put it up?
Okay, can you project from your side because now it's blank on my screen? Sorry about that.
No problem. Apologies for the wait. I'm just getting the presentation up.
Okay, so I think let's take a little bit of an ad break while we're just waiting for the presentation to come along. Okay, great. There's Bernadine now. I was going to suggest we got a poll that we can do in the meantime. But let's just follow up with Bernadine's presentation.
Apologies for the wait, guys. Kabela, is the presentation up?
Yes, it is. Thanks, Benny.
Okay, so you can just tell me where to stop. I will then operate from my end.
Okay, sure, that's fine. Sure, the next slide. All right. Thanks, Benny. Apologies to everyone because on my side it was showing full screen, so I don't know what happened with the PC. So at OMET, our intervention then had to focus, based on the introduction that I presented, had to focus on facilitating transition and change so that our students can adjust. So through this process, we partnered with a counseling psychologist whom then was able to facilitate this session. I start with the quote: when change happens without people going through transition, it is just a rearrangement of chairs. So for us, our intervention was focused on facilitating change, transition, and adjustment. And we used the cognitive behavioral therapy as an approach because we realized that there is a connection between thinking, feeling, and doing. Because it was important for us to highlight to our students that how they feel and how they think largely influences their behavior. Because we learned that the quality of everything we do is determined by the quality of thinking we do first. Hence, then the behavior modification was crucial for us to facilitate transition and as well as adjustment during this pandemic. The next slide, Benny. All right, some of the lessons that were learned by our students include self-fullness, intentionality, and pause. Just like they say in rugby terms, they normally say crouch, touch, pause, and engage. So it's important for our students to know when to touch, when to crouch, when to pause, and when to engage. In this instance, self-fullness refers to the ability of one taking care of his or her own self, because the reality is that you can't pour from an empty cup. Hence, it's important for our students to take these lessons. Secondly, intentionality. Inculcating the value of intentionality to our students also promotes that they do everything purposefully and they attach value to their lives and their own academics. And the concept of pause, it's important that our students at some point will be able to pause, look back, reflect, review, so that they can refine and revise their plans accordingly. And along the way, through this intervention, which we partnered with Decolonial Mental Health, facilitated by Zolani Metu, we learned that managing stress also takes us to recognize our thoughts and interrogate our gut feeling, because largely how we feel and what we think influences the behavior in a given time. So these are the lessons and highlights that our students have mentioned. Some of the lessons for the staff, that's us as student support officers at OMET, we learned that it's important for us to understand how students define mental wellness and illness in their own terms and understanding, and how these understanding have shaped largely how they perceive and respond to mental illness. Reality is that students are socialized from different backgrounds, so it's important for us to understand how it is known and understood in their own families and communities, so that we can be able to provide more information and more clarity, so that students are better informed of what mental wellness, mental illness means, so that they are a better place of distinguishing or making a difference between these terms. And lastly, wellness achievement. It was important for us as well to interrogate and ask our students if they've seen any cases of success cases of people who have consulted for mental illnesses and mental wellness. And through these engagements, we learned that some students have attached some stigma to seeking help in terms of mental wellness and mental health because of some of the things they've encountered in their childhood years and also what they've seen and heard in their own communities. So now we are better placed and better understanding of how to best respond to our students because we'll be speaking in the language that they understand, in the language that they have shared with us. So now I will give over to my colleague Nosipho to come in and continue the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkubela. Hi, everyone. My name is Nosipho. Like Nkubela has already said, I also work for Old Mutual Education Trust. And part of what we've done as OMET in the process of interrogating the wellness of our students was conducting a workshop, like Nkubela already mentioned, with the Colonial Mental Health, facilitated by Zolani, the qualified psychologist Zolani Metu. And on the screen, as you can see, Benny, can we go to, yes, on the screen, as you can see, these are some of the questions that were asked to the students just to assess their general well-being. And this was a voluntary process for the students. And we did not use this as a diagnostic process for OMET, but we also made sure that we didn't have data, individual data that we can look at for the students. So what happened is that students were responding anonymously. So the virtual nature of the workshop meant that interaction with students would be limited. As such, Zolani used an engagement software known as Mentimeter. I'm sure most of you know that it is an online engagement platform which allows facilitators to ask questions and the response of the attendees are displayed on the screen during the workshop. So the facilitator explained the assessment and what the scores meant. As you can see, one of the screening, the question that was asked was for screening depression, for example. Over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by the following problems where you felt like during the lockdown that you have no interest at all of doing anything and you're feeling down or depressed? And the overall response that we got from the cohort at the time was that 1.4, which was less, which means that the students were showing that no significant signs of depression. And then some of the questions that were asked was checking for resilience. The average score for that one was about 3.1, which meant that OMET cohort had normative resilience and they tend to cope better with stressful situations and even negatively affected the way they recover quicker. Benny, and the other general question was just to ask them if they have anyone in case of emergency, are there people you can talk to when you feel low or anxious? And the majority of them said yes, which was a good thing for us. And would you know if you had a mental emergency, and would you have people that others said yes, others said no? Benny, can you move to the next slide, please? And then from that, these are some of the thoughts of the student post-webinar. One of the students shared how she deals with not getting the mark that she aimed for. And she used the approach of pausing and engaging. And from that, the student was just reflecting to say that she realized that she does not have to rush to be harsh to herself, but rather take a breather and start afresh. One was just mentioning that she learned that not to self-diagnose, but rather be aware of her mental state and know when to consult. Others have said, I've always thought that my academic goals influence negatively on my mental health. However, after the webinar, I realized that what exactly it is mental ill and disease. So these are just some of the responses from the students. Next slide, Benny. So what has worked for us as OMET, I mean, for staff well-being was we just, to be quite honest, we just stayed at home, did what the government said we must do. We need to take care of yourself and use your home remedies that the grannies knows best how to use to do that, and take vitamin C and just have your daily exercise. Take care of yourself as an individual, because you're taking care of the students. And for some organization, I'm fortunate to work for an organization that arranged for us staff wellness sessions, which had themes for each week. And then I would encourage also other organizations to probably do the same thing, because it's very important. And we just sanitize and wash our hands often, just to keep ourselves safe as staff. And for those of you, we also, some of us were drinking umhlonyane. I think there was a lot that was said about umhlonyane. It's a traditional plant that has been used for decades by traditional healers to treat various illnesses. So we've been really trying to make sure that we keep on being healthy and stay insane. So what has worked for us as OMET during this process, what we did not eradicate what we were offering students before. Instead, we substituted by embracing the new normal. We walked the journey with the student and spoke in a language that they will understand, and that is technology. We try to advance with online learning using all the digital platforms such as WhatsApp video, WhatsApp Messenger, Google Classroom, Zoom, and Teams. And we really believe that if your model of supporting students is working, don't fix it because it's not broken. Instead, try and collaborate and work with other organizations that are here to strengthen your processes. And the other thing that worked for us was we use this, the Stephen Covey defines this as a fifth habit, where he's saying, understand, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Seeking real understanding affirms that other person and what they have to say. So we need to seek to understand our students. Benny, can we go to the next slide? I'm really hoping that we didn't go over time. And that is our presentation. And I think now I'll hand over to Rita from the Students for Better Future to share what has worked for her organization. Over to you, Rita.
Okay. Let's just see. Are you all able to see my screen? Everything sounds good?
Yes, Rita.
Okay, great. So good morning. My name is Rita Kruger and I manage the psychosocial support portfolio within Students for a Better Future. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak to you about student wellness today. Now, within what we were preparing, I think it's very important for us to look at the impact of COVID-19, because we cannot get away from how COVID has impacted on student wellness, and then also to look at how to best then promote student wellness. So firstly, it's important for us to look at how COVID has impacted on the well-being of our students. So if we look at the lockdown period, and even if you think about yourself sitting here, maybe you have felt worried or feelings of anxiety or fear, low mood, poor concentration, poor productivity. And what I would like to say to you today is that you're not alone, and our students aren't alone in feeling the way they have been feeling. Our foundations have been shaken and our sense of normality has shifted. Changes to our daily lives, trying to keep up with these changes, the constant news cycles coupled with physical distancing measures have been found to have a real impact on our mental health. And studies have also found that prolonged periods of uncertainty can cause anxiety and stress. So there's an element of fear of the unknown, of not knowing and being uncertain, of how this pandemic is going to play out, what might happen next week, what is going to happen within our families, what is going to happen with our jobs. And this unknown or uncertainty is impacting not just on physical or mental well-being, but even our financial well-being. There's so many aspects or areas of our lives that are being impacted by COVID at the moment. So when our sense of uncertainty is questioned, our stress response go haywire, arousing our flight and fight response or reactions. And we know from studies that have been done on stress reactions that if these flight and fight reactions are activated on a continuous basis, it can take a toll on our wellness and our health. So chronic stress can contribute to anxiety, depression, cause insomnia, affect how we eat, and even cause overeating. So there's a real impact of stress on our well-being, and we need to then look at how we manage this stress. And I also think it's important to note that COVID and the effects of it is different for everyone. Speaking from an SBF perspective and speaking specifically about our students, the impact of COVID has had financial implications on our students, with some parents losing their jobs, families losing their income, families becoming dependent on the stipends from the students. We speak about the concept of black tax, and this is a reality for our students, and it's really impacted them, with families really relying on stipends to get them through the month and to put food on the table, which has also impacted on the students and how they manage their own funds. Studies are also showing that the post-quarantine psychological effects may include significant socioeconomic distress and psychological symptoms due to financial losses. So at this point, we might not even know how far-reaching the consequences are going to be. And the students and their families are experiencing sickness, loss, grief. There's a concept that I was attending a webinar yesterday, and they spoke about suspended grief as a new concept, because sometimes we can't go to the funerals, you can't be there to say goodbye, participate in the rituals in which you would normally have done. And it was such an interesting concept, and it's not a new concept to do with COVID, but it is sometimes where we can't say goodbye, the suspended grief, and that sits with us also. The students also have to adjust to online learning, experiencing device connectivity, data issues, access issues, orientating to online systems which weren't familiar to them, and having to manage their own distance learning, which has produced issues around productivity, motivation, difficulties with concentration and focus. Some of them, like OMET mentioned before, have had to move back home, and quarantining in non-affirming or even stressful home environments, which might be abusive. And this has had an impact not only physically, but also on their mental well-being. So we have to understand the bigger implications of trauma on the well-being of not only our students, but every one of us even attending this meeting. Each of us respond differently to traumatic situations. And these situations to do with trauma is also complex, and it's very unique to each of us. And some of our students who might be more vulnerable and have had traumatic experiences before might be in this situation being re-traumatized and could potentially suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. So these are all the realities of things that we are negotiating at the moment. So if I were to ask many of you to share the narratives of your beneficiaries, their narratives might be very similar to our students. For me, the better question is, how are we and how will we in the future respond to this? How will we promote well-being, not just for our students, but also for ourselves? Because we are the caregivers and helping professionals who need to be able to support. Okay. So one way to do this is from a holistic approach to understanding health and well-being. For this purpose, I would like us to just focus on what I've now put together as the 8 dimensions of wellness. There's a lot of theories and 7 elements and 12 elements. I like this one because it speaks to me specifically to our students also in the sense of academic and occupational, also bringing that into the holistic view of well-being. So these are elements that are generally viewed as multidimensional, and these dimensions are interdependent, meaning that they interact and overlap with one another to produce health and wellness. So for instance, if one of these areas are affected, it might have a ripple effect on the other areas of wellness within us. So we used to see a person as a whole being, And we have to take all of these dimensions into consideration, because nothing happens, wellness doesn't happen in a vacuum. Every action affects more than just parts of the body and mind. That is most evident because these areas are interconnected. And we're seeing this currently from what I explained in terms of the impact of COVID on our students. So it also becomes a responsibility for us not to just focus on one of these areas. We very often go to either the social or the emotional, psychological well-being, but there's so many other areas that we also need to focus on when we're providing student support. Okay, so I would just like to reference this as I do talk about it later on, but we recently did a study, a student survey with our post-secondary students, and 66% of the students reported an increase of stress, anxiety, and feelings of sadness or despair as a result of COVID-19. And 24% actually mentioned that they may be experiencing these feelings of anxiety, stress because of COVID-19. So you can see a majority of our students feel that their mental health has been affected negatively by the pandemic. And the feedback from our final year students have also been that there's a high level of stress and anxiety around their futures and their career paths. The economy is so uncertain in our country, and this has severely impacted by the discontinuation of services, businesses closing down, job losses, leaving many feeling financially insecure. And experts in the field have also predicted that the effects of the economics in our country are perhaps going to have far-reaching impacts on employability and also our financial stability in the future. And this can have a direct impact on our final year students who are entering the workforce, or we're supposed to enter also the workforce next year. So how do we respond? How do we promote student wellness within our organizations? One of the most critical protective factors for good mental health is human connection. I think we spoke about it last week in our smaller groups also. Community and building community isn't just about proximity. It's first and foremost a mindset about who we consider to be our own. And I know we talk about this concept of community and family within our organization. So in the face of physical distance, I think it's important to note that we need one another, maybe more than ever before, to get through difficult times. So staying emotionally connected is critical to our mental health. It's also important to know that who you can turn to in times like this, and also who you can show up for. And we are showing up at the moment through having safe channels like video conferencing, phone calls, social media, text messages. And these are all good measures to put in place in terms of connecting. And yeah, check in with your colleague, check in with your students checking in with one another. These are all good protective factors in terms of well-being and maintaining well-being. I think it's also important to note that self-care is important for our students, but also for ourselves. As we work in the helping profession, like I said, it's important to keep our own well-being in mind as we're actively providing support to others. We can also stay physically and mentally well when there is heightened stress levels by doing self-care and establishing routines, going to sleep at your normal time, waking up at your normal time, going to bed, engaging in your normal exercise routine, which is, of course, we can't go to the gym and has been affected. So I think what's important then is to also to reflect on our own self-care routine and ascertain if you're looking after yourself. And the same can be asked for our students. What measures are they putting in place to promote their own self-care? There's also many apps that we've been incorporating into our information to the students. So there's a lot of new technology that's come out, and all technology that people are using at the moment. Okay. So at SBF, we have a number of measures that we've implemented within our post-secondary space. I will speak to these individually just to give you a very short overview of them and talk about our next steps also. We've provided counselling and one-on-one check-ins with our students. We provide opportunities for group dialogues. We have launched a mentoring app and work readiness program, as well as provide psychosocial support and psychoeducation through a newsletter and information that goes out to students. We've also directly addressed the students' need by increasing their stipends, providing data to them, providing food vouchers, and laptops to support their online learning. In terms of the counselling, we make use of telepsychology, so we use many online platforms like Zoom or WhatsApp, text messaging, email, Google Meet. This has been a great resource for us as it increases our accessibility to our students and for them to access our counselling services, but it also reduces that stigma of seeking help. We have also provided this through our in-house psychosocial department and by referring students to SADAG, to the institutional support services. What we have found is that there are waiting lists and sometimes they cannot be seen in the time that they need to be. The post-secondary coordinators have also been connecting with students for one-on-one check-ins, and they have been responding to them in a direct and indirect way also. We've also found that the students connect with one another through WhatsApp groups and institutionally by supporting one another academically, which has been really great. So they don't need necessarily that outside support from us. They have their own support systems that they've been sort of fostering. Some challenges that we found with this is that there is sometimes very little privacy at home, and it's non-existent in other times. So we've had to adapt to just using online WhatsApp, email to communicate. We've also provided spaces for students to discuss and open up dialogue about things that have been very prominent in the media. Gender-based violence, racism have been some of the topics that have come out recently. These discussions have been facilitated by both our psychosocial and our post-secondary team members. And our hope is to get more students engaged in dialogues and for our post-secondary students to engage in dialogues with our high school team also, scholars, I mean. I think they have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and they have lived experiences that they can share with our high school team also. We're also currently rolling out first-year adjustment groups with theme sessions where some of our focus area include financial literacy, black tax, mental health, adjustment to online learning, and managing your own learning. This is just a space for them to connect and for us to also have an opportunity to provide psychosocial support. We've experienced some challenges around attendance. We might have one group that's well attended and the next one person shows up. And I think from our previous sessions, this is a theme that's been sort of a thread through all the organizations. There's a term Zoom fatigue that has come up. We have experienced survey fatigue also. So these are real things that we also struggle with. Some successes that we've had is that we sent out a survey to ascertain the students' specific needs, and we have identified themes that we will focus on, for instance, around stress management and motivation. And we also have our alumni students who want to be involved in providing support to our students in terms of them giving back and also fostering closer connections and support. So some of the survey highlighted that they would like to engage around gender-based violence, racism, stress management. And again, we've seen if there's these issues come up within social media or in the news, they spark real feelings within our students and it affects their mental health. So we have seen a sort of a direct correlation between that too. In terms of academic support, they've highlighted that they need support around personal mastery and building resilience. And we're currently looking at potential interventions to best respond to these areas of need that they have highlighted. Some other areas that they've asked for us to, or assistance with, or to support them with is goal setting, dealing with failure, time management, and financial literacy. So our job now is to look at how to best respond to these in the current, using online technology or because we're not meeting with our students face-to-face too. Okay. We've also in this time launched the MobiMentor App a few months ago. So it's a pilot program with the company Mentoring for Success, and the goal is to provide a mentoring program to support our students navigating through university and beyond. We receive monthly reports, which provides us with qualitative and quantitative feedback around who is, coming onto the app, what subject matter are they, focusing on, and what's quite nice about it is that students can engage with one another through asking questions, making contributions, sharing insights, but staff can also engage with students on the app, and then we have experts in the fields that can also come in and then provide support and mentorship through this app to the students. We've also recently launched the Work Readiness program. We initially had 20 students and alumni join the pilot program. So it's a three-pronged approach where the alumni and the students get individual coaching, focusing on areas such as self-confidence or making decisions, and then an e-learning through online workshops where there's a focus on HR and contracts, CV and motivational, letter writing, entrepreneurship, and then masterclasses where experts in the fields come and work with the students closely. And some of the psychosocial things that we're speaking about is mental health, dealing with transition, diversity and inclusion. So these are all things in terms of preparing them for work and that space that we have implemented. We've also provided psychosocial support by providing them information, apps, resources for them to be able to access support, not just within our organization, but outside. So just providing them with education resources, links, such as websites and applications to be able to promote their own well-being. Okay. So from our experiences, we're realizing that we're having to be very inventive, intentional, also very creative in providing opportunities for facilitating, making spaces for dialogue, building community connections, because these are such important factors when we're looking at student wellness. So we want to continue to create spaces where they can connect with one another, as well as build these emotional connections. However, in saying this, the students are also making use of modes that are available to them. They've really taken ownership of their own needs and are making connections and keeping those connections, through their WhatsApp groups, through their university chat groups. And like I said, we are mindful of Zoom fatigue. So that's something that we are having to also navigate. And perhaps it's creating opportunities for webinars where the information is presented, where they don't necessarily have to engage. It's something that we need to look at and take forward. And I know some of your other organizations have already started with webinars, and your feedback has been very positive. So that's something that I think we're very excited about too. So in addition, I've just highlighted some very vital components of wellness. And these speak directly to our 8 dimensions of well-being. And these are normal things that we say when we speak about wellness that you need to put in place. And we don't just say it to fill up space, but these are really important things that need to be in place for us to really look after ourselves and to be well. So as I mentioned before, it's important not just to focus on one area of the student's well-being, but see wellness as an holistic, interactive process. So when you are planning your strategies in terms of what are you going to put in place for those students, you need to look at these 8 dimensions of wellness and look at how are we as an organization addressing each of those. It's therefore a challenge for us in the face of COVID-19 to continue our current practices, or then to adapt and be innovative in our ways of promoting wellness to optimally support our students. I just wanted to share this with you because it's just very much speaking to the previous slide. But I will leave you with this in terms of my thinking around student wellness and what we want to promote within Students for a Better Future. But our students, as we are sitting here as professionals, are likely to be vulnerable and traumatized by the COVID-19 pandemic due to the negative effects it has had already on people's lives, and it probably will continue to have for the next foreseeable future. So during this time of change and uncertainty, it's even more important to take care of ourselves on a day-to-day basis. Remember that no one is immune to what is currently happening in our country and in the world. So there are ways that I've highlighted here, and there's many more, but to remain healthy and connected during COVID-19, whether you have a couple of hours or a couple of minutes per day, just remember self-care and looking after yourself and promoting that to the students also. So thank you very much for this opportunity and allowing me this time. I really appreciate it. Over to you, Stacey.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Let me just checking. Yeah, okay, perfect. Good morning, everybody. My name is Stacey, and I'm the head of programs at Tomorrow Trust. And to sort of just wrap up this morning's webinar on.
I think I was just on calls. Yes, we are.
Thank you. Just to wrap up this morning's webinar, I will be talking a little bit more about student wellness, and specifically I will be talking more about the impact of COVID and also what the future will bring and how we have to start preparing for it. So the impact of COVID-19 on the world, on ourselves, on our family, and on our work has been paramount. I don't think we can actually put a word to it, although here are some words that I was putting down last night when I was putting the presentation together. But what the crisis has actually really done is it's combined numerous mental health stresses that have been studied before in other disasters, but never consolidated in one global crisis. And so that's I think the key thing that COVID has done for us during this time. So if we all think about the type of people we all work with university students. So if we think about the age, the demographic, the background, the students that we work with are at a very important developmental stage, a very complicated one, a very difficult one, and sometimes also a very volatile one. So I think when we think about student wellness and the way in which COVID has impacted and the pandemic and lockdown has, we need to bear this in mind, that our students are at a very crucial developmental stage in their life and in their journey. So some things to sort of just think about is, do we understand the developmental stage our students are currently in? How is the trauma of the COVID-19 lockdown exacerbating underlying mental health triggers? What is the long-term psychological impact of the lockdown going to be on our students? How do we work with these challenges? And are we prepared for the future? Because I think at the moment, with the way that the pandemic sort of came upon us and lockdown happened so suddenly, we are currently dealing with a lot of immediate issues that our students are experiencing. And we're sort of trying to come up with interventions and support measures in place to deal with what is happening right now. But we do need to start thinking about what the future will hold and what life will be post-lockdown as well. What kind of challenges will our students experience, and how will we support them? If we just start with the developmental stage that our students are in, the age range of 18 to about 25 is a pretty complicated stage for them. In addition to having a lot of development happening in our brains and in our hormone levels, specifically related to emotional regulation and social interaction. If we look at some of the other theories like Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, Erikson said that personality develops through 8 stages from infancy to adulthood. And during these stages, each person experiences a psychosocial crisis, which could have either a positive or a negative outcome on their personality development, depending on how well they deal with that. So our students are currently in stage 6 of Erikson's theory, which is intimacy versus isolation. And this entire developmental stage is focused on relationships, it's focused on social interactions, it's all focused around that area of development, the social area. So the theory says that successful completion of this stage leads to a sense of commitment, leads to safety and care, and an unsuccessful completion of the stage leads to isolation, loneliness, and depression. So a really crucial developmental stage that our students are in, especially in terms of their well-being and their development. Now, I know a lot of people are also very familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which says that when basic needs are met, humans are motivated to meet higher needs. And Maslow's basic theory has the components of physiological needs, safety needs, loving and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization, which in Maslow's traditional theory, physiological needs speak a lot to things like clothing, it speaks a lot to things like food, it speaks a lot to a lot of the very physical aspects and physical needs we have. Safety speaks a lot to physical safety. It also speaks a lot to health. It speaks a lot to things like employment, job security. Loving and belonging speaks a lot to friends and family and all of those kinds of things. Esteem speaks a lot to freedom, strength, respect. And then you've got right at the top self-actualization, which is according to Maslow's theory, where we're all trying to head for. So here's a slightly different take. Maslow's hierarchy of student needs. So applying Maslow's theory, this sort of emphasizes what university students need. So at a physiological level, thinking also about where our students currently are in COVID, at a physiological level, are our students getting what they need? Are they getting the basics, but are they also safe? Are they in a physical safe space? From a safety level, this speaks a lot more to the emotional and intellectual safety of our student, which, as I've just said on the slide before, is very crucial to the developmental stage of the student. Loving and belonging is that sense of belonging. It's belonging to a university, it's belonging to an organization, belonging to a faculty. So that's the loving and belonging stage. The esteem stage speaks to self-concept as a learner, finding value in the work, finding purpose, finding a reason to keep going, to keep getting up every day and to keep going. And then at the top, we have self-actualization. So if we think about our students, what we're seeing is that at this developmental stage, the social and emotional learning is key for all of them. And anything that may be negatively impacting that development can lead to a lot of negative issues further on down the line. So if we look at the impact of lockdown, humans are social beings. From an evolutionary perspective, that's what we are. So if we look at the social impacts of lockdown, particularly on our students, social environments have shrunk. There are no lectures, there are no campus activities, there are no extracurricular activities, none of that is happening at the moment. So the result of that is that critical opportunities for key emotional and social skills to be developed have now just completely diminished. The other thing that has also happened is now there is less access to positive social support, and that can be in even the smallest of ways. So you don't see that lecturer anymore who always used to ask how you are. You don't bump into people that you would see on a day-to-day basis and have a conversation with them about something. Those sort of really small but very significant aspects of social support are no longer existing for our students. And the outcome of that is a decreased capacity to cope with stress. Research shows us that an ability to cope with stress is very strongly linked to having positive social support structures in place. Safe spaces are no longer accessible. So our students can never escape from home. And I put home in inverted commas because it doesn't necessarily mean your physical home, but it means that for a lot of students, wherever they consider their foundation to be is not always a healthy or a positive space for them. And so being able to go to campus and to go to lectures and to engage and interact with people, for a lot of students offered them an escape and offered them a safe space from things that were happening in their personal lives. So the outcome of this is that now our students just have a continuous exposure to physically, but also emotionally unhealthy and unsafe environments. Lastly, being unable to work through trauma. So when individuals experience trauma, specifically as children or as young adults, working through relationships as they get older is a way of healing that trauma. It's a very indirect way of healing trauma. So at the moment, if students are not able to interact with people and are not able to have those kinds of social interactions, that traumatic healing is not happening for them. That indirectly or directly rather can impact the positive emotional and social development of a student. So the emotional impact of lockdown, exposure to trauma. So trauma is something that is defined as a single event that creates excessive psychological or mental or physical strain on a person. So what we are currently experiencing with lockdown is exposure to a prolonged trauma, because this is not a once-off event that has happened, that has ended, and that we have now moved on. It's a prolonged trauma, and it is very unpredictable, and we don't know when it's going to end. So examples of this that students can be experiencing is not knowing what will happen, not being in control, feeling helpless, all of which are characteristic of traumatic events. So the outcome of that is at the moment that neurodevelopmental, social, cognitive, and emotional development is being disrupted. And the longer we are in lockdown for, and the longer our students are exposed to trauma, the less likelihood of them in developing the positive aspects of their social and cognitive development that they need. Lockdown has also put our students in a continuous state of fear. And a large part of that is always linked to the unknown. Will I complete the academic year? What will happen for me next year if I'm in my final year? Will I find a job? Will I be able to support my family? Will I catch the virus? Will someone I know die from the virus? Or will I die from the virus? So constantly being in this state of fear puts us in a survival mode. And that for us means that our cortisol levels are always overactive, which has extensive impact. I'm not going to go into it now because I could do a whole biology lesson on it, but that can have extensive impact on our bodies, both physically and mentally as well. The lockdown environment can be argued to currently be the biggest psychological experiment we have ever faced. We are not in a normal situation, and we are not in a situation that humans or the human race has ever been in. So this sort of state at the moment gives us a complete lack of freedom, a lack of feeling like we're not in control. And something as simple as that kind of feeling can bring up a lot of triggers from our childhood or from experiences we have had as young adults. And these can become activated for everybody. So there is a lot of research that is showing that students or adults who have a predisposition or have experienced some mental health challenges may be more at risk of lockdown. But what we are also seeing is that people who have never experienced any kind of mental challenges before are now experiencing for them for the first time, because the lockdown environment is bringing up and is triggering a lot of feelings and a lot of situations that have not been brought up or dealt with before. What the lockdown has also done is put all of us in a unique opportunity where we are forced to self-reflect. So we have plenty of time with ourselves, our thoughts, our memories. We don't have social distractions. And when we do have social distractions or when we do engage with people, we are always talking about the lockdown. We're always talking about the fears around the lockdown, and we're always talking about the anxieties around the lockdown. So this means that for our students at the moment, again, just thinking about the developmental stage that they're in and the time where they're developing their social and emotional development, now they have to deal with multiple issues at the same time. Some of them are COVID related and some of them are not. Some of them are completely personal but have been exacerbated or brought up because of COVID and the lockdown. And lastly, just to touch on the psychological impacts of the lockdown. So at the moment, what we're experiencing is mass grief and mourning with an unknown ending. When we experience grief or when we experience mourning, it's usually because something has happened, a very concrete and specific event has happened. We mourn the event and we know that it has come to an end. At the moment, we don't know when lockdown will come to an end. So we sort of have mass grief and mourning, which is extremely complicated because it has an unknown ending. So this can be simple things like missing out on a graduation or being an honor student and moving to a new university and a new city just for the 1 year, now not having the experience of being at that university or that city for the year. Planned activities not happening, students not being able to travel for events or to celebrate things with their friends and their families. And in addition to that, you have things like not being able to say goodbye to somebody if they contract the virus and if they pass away. So these experiences of different types of grief, because what we're seeing now is that we're experiencing different types of grief, we're not just experiencing one type, can be very confusing and overwhelming. So it's just sort of adding to all the other emotions that somebody might currently be experiencing. Then we've also got loneliness. Now, loneliness is not the same as social isolation, and it's not the same as aloneness or choosing to be alone. So loneliness is a painful emotional experience that arises when there is a difference between your actual social contacts and what you desire them to be. And that's what a lot of people are experiencing at the moment. Social isolation is the absence of social interactions and contacts and relationships with friends and family, but loneliness is something very different to that. So largely where we're seeing something like that is planned activities like birthdays, trip celebrations being cancelled. And as well as the lack of social support, as I mentioned before, where if you do speak with friends or family, everybody's just talking about the virus. So this is creating a real loss in a sense of belonging, because at the moment, you don't really belong to anything. You don't belong to university because you're not going for lectures. You don't belong to a club or a society. And in addition to that, it's also leading to an inability to build resilience, which is something that we would all naturally do as part of this developmental stage. The third thing is burnout. Burnout at the moment is a very real reality, I think, for our students especially. And what we're seeing is that of the 5 stages of burnout, so we have the honeymoon phase, which is stage 1, onset of stress is stage 2, chronic stress stage 3, burnout stage 4, and habitual burnout is stage 5. Generally, we all sort of operate in the honeymoon phase and the onset of stress phase, which very much say that we know we're a bit stressed, we've got quite a few things going on, but we're able to navigate and we're able to sustain that for quite a period of time. But what's happening at the moment is because of the lack of social interactions we have and because of the way that lockdown is, and it's forced us to not have freedom and be able to do things, we're all sort of sitting, or we might be sitting, let me say rather, in stage 4 and 5, which is burnout and habitual burnout. And there's no relief in sight. We don't actually know when we'll be able to take the time to look after ourselves properly in the way we need when we suffer from burnout. And lastly, we have PTSD, which is the most common in post-conflict settings. And the PTSD brings a lot of emotions with it, especially helplessness, disappointment, and worthlessness, which are a lot of emotions that we don't generally feel. And PTSD, as we've seen from experiences we've had in the world before, for example, with wars or with other global crises, has very complicated long-term mental and emotional issues. So I think we need to be aware of how the lockdown is impacting our students in different ways, both socially, emotionally, and psychologically, and the importance of this given the developmental stage that our students are currently at. So if we look at interventions, our interventions generally to help the students maneuver through this developmental stage, particularly because if they do not maneuver it in a positive way or in a healthy way, may experience a lot of negative consequences further down the line. We need to remember that our interventions do need to focus on the social and emotional development. Designing programs that allow for students to keep building their social interactions and relationships, especially for lockdown, will help facilitate that developmental stage and will reduce the negative impact that may happen after lockdown as well. So much of human communication is nonverbal, meaning that we have to incorporate that into our programs. We do have to keep that element of human interaction in them as well. We need to try and keep creating safe spaces for our students as well. Again, how we do this can be done in many, many different ways, but I think providing students with a space where they can come together, they can relate with each other, they can know that they are not alone, they can give them also that sense of belonging, at least to an organization or to a family or to whatever it is, will at least help students feel cared about, thought of, and a priority. So in terms of the interventions that we do during this time, if we can do things that focus on developing those social and emotional components for students, that needs to be our goal. So lastly, for the future, are we ready? What will the impact of the pandemic on our current students be in the future? So we're working with them now, but what will happen once they graduate and they enter the job world? How will we prepare to support the students that we work with in the future? So the students that come to us in 3 years' time, how will we be prepared to work with them? Because we will be working with students that will be seeing 3 years of impact, for example, of the lockdown. Will we have new mental health challenges? So will we now have post-lockdown stress disorder? And what will that look like? Will we have complexities around anxiety and depression that we don't currently have? And then what will our interventions need to then look like? And lastly, last month, the Royal College of Psychiatry in London said, we have a tsunami of mental illness coming and we better be ready. So just something to think about for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tomorrow Trust, Education Trust, and Students for a Better Future. I will now put up the presentation again and just give me a second to share. One thing that really stood out for me during the presentation sessions was that all of the organizations are 100% behind students during this unprecedented time. And essentially that is all we need. Just give me a second to put up my presentation again. Share screen. Go. There we go. Thank you. So normally, colleagues, we would have a session where we would address questions to the presenters. Because of time, that won't be possible. What we are doing instead is we'll have a polling session where Julian will put up a few questions on the screen, as we can see, and then if everybody could just participate and respond to the questions that's on the screen. Thank you. Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, I'm not sure when the results will pop up, Julian, but in the interim, I'm just going to take you through the next part of our program. It is the breakaway sessions, and this is where we normally have the small group discussions. Again, for the sake of time, we will have a short 10-minute session. We will only have 3 questions to discuss, and we do not have to come back to the bigger group to share. In fact, there's one question that we will focus on to share, and you do not have to nominate a scribe, but please keep the time in mind. Is everybody able to see the poll results on the screen?
Yes, Bernadine, we managed to see the results. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So please have a look at the results. This can also be used as the basis of your discussion that will be taking place in the small groups. I will now put up the questions for the breakaway session. Okay, my screen is acting up. There we go. So we have 3 questions that we'll be focusing on for the sake of time. Okay. Please take a picture of the questions. Note that it will also be available, or it will be showing in the chat function. And then I will now hand over to Julian to do his magic to move us into the smaller groups. Thank you.
Tomorrow Trust. However, what I've presented today and all the thinking that goes into it and our understanding of the students is, I think, what happens behind the scenes. So, you know, what I've presented to you today is not necessarily how we would present something to our students. It's rooted in therapeutic practice and theory, but the interventions that we design and that we implement with our students are far simpler. So I'll give you an example. We usually at this time of the year would do, as I'm sure many people do, we would do what's called a board review with our students. So this is not a check-in, this is a mock performance evaluation, like the kind you would go through if you were employed at a company, like a sort of quarterly evaluation. So these normally would be done face-to-face, sitting in front of a panel, so it's very formal. With lockdown, obviously, we were not able to do it that way, and so we ended up doing it through Zoom. So we had our 15-minute slots with all our students, and they were required to score themselves on various items, and we used that as a way of encouraging self-reflection and promoting feedback, which in turn facilitates their development on an emotional level. It also facilitates their ability to have that social connection with us. I mean, one student actually said to us, I was so looking forward to this because I haven't spoken to anybody the whole day. So it's, you know, the theory behind why we implement an intervention like that is very therapeutic in its nature, but the actual implementation itself, what's seen to the students, is very simple and basic. So I hope I've answered Helen's question.
Thank you, Stacey. I'll just share my screen again. So we are now back to the report back and closure session. We have limited time for feedbacks, colleagues. So if anybody would like to share what came out of your group discussion, The floor is open.
I can just share a few points that came up for us based on the second question in terms of what we've learned from our students is, I think we all shared sentiments around just how resilient they've been through all of this. Yes, it's been difficult, but they've shown an immense amount of resilience and also just their capacity to adapt to a new style of learning, something that they've never done before. They've managed to adapt to it so well and ended up getting, quite impressive results. And also just them being quite optimistic about, the rest of the year or the future, and not really letting what is going on now have a negative impact just on the way that they think about their future. And also the students who've been able to take lead in their communities and their families. So throughout all of this, they've been able to show their leadership skills by, guiding their families, helping, reaching out for resources. So that being, a lot of positive things that we've noticed our students display during what's a very difficult time.
Thank you very much. And also if you could just include what came out of the group discussion when you touched on question 3, sorry. What would your organization take with them going forward?
Hi, Bernadine. This is Habiba from the Old Mutual Education Trust. I was in breakaway room 7. The one thing that we highlighted, that we take forward, is that we've learned that, as much as we assume young people have their head in technology all the time, this period has really emphasized how nothing can replace the value of human connection and how much students appreciate it. But the one thing where technology has been helpful is in the collecting and sharing of information. And we should learn and build on how we've been doing that going forward.
Thank you very much, Habiba. Anybody else? Any other comments, perhaps?
I've just typed a couple of things. Sorry, I'll turn my video on. Russell Davies from REAP. Yeah, just a couple of things that struck me in terms of Stacey's presentation was around safety and boundaries, that most of our staff are not qualified psychologists or therapists. And so, yes, they're providing a level of support, but how do you know what's within your capacity and safety to provide, and what needs to be referred to specialists, and how do you maintain those kind of boundaries? So I think that's definitely a concern when you're dealing in the realm of wellness and mental health. The other issue I raised, which came from our group, was around students saying they feel bewitched or cursed, and how do we deal with that? It sort of falls outside the domain of typical Western mental health paradigms, and yet it's very real for many students. So, how do we address that?
Thank you very much, Russell. Does anybody have a response for Russell?
I think, Russell, in our group, we actually spoke a lot more about the use of resources available at the institutions, specifically with regards to wellness. And Suzanne was in our group as well, so she spoke from a UKZN perspective in terms of what services the universities are now offering the students and all the interventions that they've implemented. I think a general rule of thumb, to your point, Russell, is if you feel like you don't know, or if you feel remotely uncomfortable, you're probably not the right person to deal with the situation at hand. Your second question, I cannot answer. It is not in my realm of expertise at all. I don't know anything about it. So automatically, if a student presented with the challenges that you mentioned, I would automatically refer. Because I don't feel comfortable being able to assist the student in that regard. So that's, I think, just a very general rule of thumb is if you don't feel comfortable, then you should automatically just find an alternative resource.
Although I would say also sometimes if people feel too comfortable and are wading in with all kinds of advice, that's not necessarily cool either. So it's sort of being conscious of your limitations is very important.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, most definitely.
Russell, based on your second question, I did type something in the chat. I
Yes,
don't know
I saw.
if
Thank you.
that's helpful at all.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. That then brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you for the participation. Thank you for your time. Please sign up for the next webinar taking place Thursday, the 6th of August, from graduation to employment. This will be hosted by the Marshall Scholarship Program, Sagia, and the Michael and Susan Andel Foundation. Also, please check out the survey and respond, and have a beautiful day further. Thank you. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you,
everyone.
Bye.